Okay, thank you for coming. Welcome to this seminar on Germany. The title of the seminar today is The Future of European Integration, a New Government for Germany and Europe. And this seminar, as most of you know, is part of our seminar series Norway Meets Europe. It is funded by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it will also be streamed online. Right now, it's very topical to have a seminar on Germany right now. It's interesting political times in Germany, which will also have consequences for Europe. While Angela Merkel may have won a fourth term as chancellor, both her party and her party has been weakened, and she has struggled for some time now to establish a coalition. And now a grand coalition with the Social Democrats has been approved, and on Sunday this week, SDU will vote on whether or not to accept to be part of this coalition. And if SDU accepts, it will be good news for those who believe in the importance of a strong Franco-German cooperation. It will be good news for Macron and his reform ideas, both nationally and for Europe. But if it rejects the deal, we will have a new period of uncertainty. And if I have understood it correctly, Merkel is reluctant to lead a minority, or has at least been reluctant to lead a minority government. And both the Conservatives and the SPD fear also what a new election might bring. So today we are very pleased to have Professor Dr. Michael Keating with us here today to talk about these issues. Michael is the Professor of European Integration and European Union Politics at the Department of Political Science and at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. And he has also several other positions. Amongst these, he is chairman of TEPSA, Trans-European Policy Association, which NUPI is a member. So thank you for coming, Michael, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to apparently have attracted a lot of attention and interest here in Oslo, in Norway, concerning the topic I will be presenting here today. I thank you very much for the kind invitation and to be with you here and to basically discuss with you the future of European integration in light of the ongoing issues in Germany. And this is probably what we might want to start with right away, because, well, these German elections in 2017, and they are dragging now for quite some time, because we are still, so to say, not sure about the results. Well, the results as such we are aware of, but we do not really know much about the consequences yet. Because in the end, these elections in Germany in 2017 took place during a whole series of actions outside of Germany in global times of political uncertainty, national elections basically never as hotly contested as we have been experiencing over the last years, not only in Germany, but actually all over the places, widespread injections of nationalistic themes, and, well, I still have a question mark next to Chancellor Merkel's fourth term as Chancellor, because this is basically what I will elaborate here on today. And to start with, I think, and to underline actually the difficulties Germany is currently facing inside the European Union, but also globally, I think these figures show very nicely what the current problem is. This is basically giving you an indication of the length of coalition negotiations in Germany. And as a matter of fact, I just compare them with other negotiations which took place actually more or less in parallel, and which you probably studied and followed actively yourself, a very important other member state in the European Union, the Netherlands. And what you can see is that these negotiations, these ongoing negotiations here, are exceptionally long in comparison with all other coalition talks we have been experiencing so far in Germany. I think you probably heard a lot about this, you read a lot about this in the newspapers, but you might be missing the figures. Here they are, and they are quite striking. And this is basically as of today, the 28th of February. So we are 156 days after the election and the electoral outcome. And we still are not sure whether we will have on Sunday a government in place or not. Angela Merkel basically came a bit closer on this Monday, this week. As you know, we had a very special party conference taking place in Berlin. And it was on this very special party conference where at least the CDU, the CSU, the Bavarian sister party, already put everything and clarified and cleared all its positions, so there is no reluctance to be expected. But also the CDU sister party now, Angela Merkel's party, embraced the idea by a big majority to continue a so-called grand coalition. I'm putting this in quotations because I will come back to this, because it is actually not so big anymore as we might have the connotation of, which we might have with a grand coalition, because in the end, as we will see later on, they come barely over the 50% if you basically put together the percentage shares of the CDU, CSU and the Social Democratic Party. This is something to be kept in mind. We call it a GroKo, eine große Koalition, but, well, what is big about it, that they barely come over the 50% threshold, but that's basically it. There is no two-third majority or anything, as we are used to have with big grand coalitions in Germany. So this is something also to be kept in mind from the very early beginning. Even if on Sunday, after the approval now, the Monday's approval of the CDU, if on Sunday now the party members of the German Social Democrats will give a positive sign and green light for a grand coalition, it is a coalition which, well, brings together 53% of the voters' turnout, and that's basically it. Not more, but also not less, but this is, I think, a very important point to be made here at the very early beginning. So it will be basically on Sunday that roughly 464,000 members of the Social Democrats will basically say yes or no. And only then we will know whether there will be a grand coalition or not. But I am actually more and more confident that even if there won't be a support on Sunday of the Social Democrats, after what I heard on Monday at the Special Party Congress of the CDU, that Angela Merkel might actually dare to consider a minority government. It's actually not up to her only to decide. I mean, it will be, we discussed this yesterday already a little bit, it will be first of all the president's role in Germany, Mr. Steinmeier, who would basically need to invite and consider, he would invite Angela Merkel and maybe also other party leaders in the German Bundestag to basically see whether they would support a minority government, based on which then he might consider and ask Angela Merkel to seriously consider a minority government. And from what you heard, or what we heard on Monday at the Special Party Congress, I think the likelihood raised that she actually sees and considers it and understands a certain degree of responsibility for a capable government. That's what she underlined. Also, in order to, and that's basically also one of the big topic of today's talk here, also in order to basically benefit from the window of opportunity we are currently facing inside the European Union, inside the European integration process, because that's basically what we will have until, as you know, May, the 26th of May, that's when we will have 24 to 26th of May, when we will have European elections again in 2019, and until then we will have pushed forward to further reforms and agreed, based on maybe some suggestions put forward by Macron. I will come back to this systematically a bit later, or not. Because if we do go for a new election, I think it is very unlikely that we will then have a government before autumn this year. And that basically would mean that we are already pretty much inside of the electoral campaign for the European elections, and that would be basically it. So I think this is something to be kept in mind. But the point is probably also, because we are in the European Union, to basically not only see what's happening in Germany, and yes, it is remarkably long that we are currently negotiating this new government, but I want to highlight as well that actually there are, and this is not only the Netherlands, but there are actually a number of countries in the European Union facing the very same challenge. And it's not only Italy, yeah? To make that very clear, as we all know, with changing governance on a regular basis, with some stability over the last couple of years, but nevertheless, this is actually a feature we see across all EU countries, and this is only one of the features. Because another specific feature we also gather, and I think that's also important to be aware of, is that all countries inside the European Union, and actually as a matter of fact also beyond, are facing more and more parties inside the parliaments. Because if you look at the German figures here, just as a gentle reminder, so this is basically the bold numbers here are those of the party groups currently in the Bundestag, all right? So we currently have 6 party groups in the Bundestag. But just as a gentle reminder, before the elections 2017, it was only 4 parties. So this is, I think, also something to be kept in mind. And this is a phenomena we are experiencing in many other countries as well. And I don't even, it's in the Netherlands, it's everywhere that we actually do have more and more party groups actually appearing and emerging in the parliamentary systems. So that's point number 1, or the second point, next to the very long and lengthy negotiations of the coalition talks. So we do actually have, with the elections in 2017, also a new situation. We have many more party groups back in the Bundestag. What we also see is that it was a devastating loss for the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. You see here it's a loss of 8%. Not many talked actually about these specific losses. More was referring to these particular losses, which were also considerable with 5%, but probably additionally remarkable because the SPD had never had as low of a percentage support in German politics as in these 2017 elections. That's probably why this attracted so much more attention, but it's something not to be forgotten about, that actually the Christian Democratic Union, they lost much more, almost twice as much as the Social Democrats, if you have a closer look. And so if on Sunday the Social Democratic Party members will support a new grand coalition, it will basically mean that we will have 2 party groups in power, which altogether lost 14% of support in the 2017 elections. I think that's also quite important to be aware of. Well, it's one thing of saying, well, we need a stable government and we need to go ahead, but in the end it will be 2 political forces in power which actually were not the winners of the elections, by far not the winners, but they lost 14% altogether. What you also will see is, and I think that's also very important, that for the very first time, they have been around for many years, but for the first time we have a very anti-migration and very Eurosceptical party group in the Bundestag with the Alternative for Germany. And this will be, in case on Sunday there will be the support of a grand coalition, the opposition leader in the Bundestag. So this is something to be aware of as well. So if we have a grand coalition, that means, by just looking at the arithmetics, right, and we don't have to have studied mathematics for that, it's not rocket science, that the Alternative for Germany will most obviously be the opposition leader in the Bundestag. So this is also something to be aware of, and actually was one of the reasons why at the beginning the Social Democrats were a little bit of reluctant to go into another grand coalition idea, because their argument being, if we go and do this, the opposition leading would be led by the Alternative for Germany. Now, and what else do you see? Well, basically you see, and that's probably, or something just to be aware of, and probably also underlining my point why I'm relatively confident that even if there is not a support on Sunday of the Social Democratic Party members for a grand coalition, that Angela Merkel might consider seriously a minority government, is because the current polls show that almost none of the party groups, specifically those, would win considerably more if we have elections next Sunday. The CDU would rather be stable, yeah, about 33%. The SPD will have further lost support. We are now at 16% for the Social Democrats, the latest polls, yeah. So they don't have an interest at all into new elections. We would have an increased number of the Alternative for Germany, so even stronger than already now. The Liberals would lose down to 9. The left and the Greens would be a little bit stronger than they are currently. But basically what it means is, and I will basically come back to this at the very end of this talk, that for the time being there is no one actually in favor of new elections. And there is a strong support, I think, even for a minority government, and there would be a strong support to be expected inside the Social Democratic and particularly the Green Party group to support a minority government of Angela Merkel. Also, the party leader of the Liberals, Herr Lindner, he announced publicly already several times that he would support a minority government under Merkel. So this is why I become more and more confident that even if there is no, so to say, support on Sunday by the party group members, party members of the Social Democrats, that it will be not another crisis as such. Well, provisionally, probably yes, we won't have a government right away, but I think I'm relatively confident that we will not have new elections taking place. So much about the figures here. Now, to move one step further, what I try to visualize here is to give you a little bit of an idea, an indication of what that basically means, potentially another grand coalition for Europe and for the European integration process. So what we basically have been doing here, and this is very simple, you will see, we identified basically all topics, and these are 2 slides. You will see 2 slides with topics clearly positioning the CDU, CSU and the SPD on European integration issues. They're not equally important. Okay, I think that's very important. We're just listing. We are not waiting or anything. We are just listing them and to give you an idea of where, and here we help you a little bit with the green shaded areas, where they do have commonalities, where they do share views and ideas about how to reform the European Union. So before we then basically link it to Macron's propositions, etc., I think we first have to make sure that you see that there are some green shaded areas, right? But they're not all of them green shaded, let's put it that way. So basically what you do see is, so there is a common appetite for tax jurisdiction, for example, for the European Parliament, so for a stronger European Parliament in the long run, and to give also the European Parliament a right of initiative respectively. Common appetite on strengthening Frontex. So as you know, the answer in Europe to the migration and refugee crisis is to give Frontex, one of the EU agencies dealing with migration issues, more powers. Both of them are very much in favor. Both of them are very much in favor of joint defense procurement. Both of them are very much in favor of free trade agreements. As you can see here, both of them are actually also in favor of instruments which resemble to Eurobonds. Both of them are in favor of, well, not advancing the accession negotiations as such with Turkey. There are both of them against direct central banking financing, and they are clearly also against Grexit. This is, I think, a very important feature because with a possible Jamaica coalition, you remember that was the first coalition in discussion, between the CDU, the Liberals and the Greens, the Liberal being a strong proponent of the idea of Grexit as a possibility, as an option to be discussed. And as Mr. Schäuble is not anymore in the government and now the president of the Bundestag, who was amongst the CDU at least playing with the idea of a Grexit, let's put it that way, this clearly has been an issue where they have agreed that this is not the way to go. The same with what to do with the European Stability Mechanism. You know that's one of the answers to the financial and banking crisis we have inside the Eurozone, to basically upgrade this to a European Monetary Fund. Also here we have both of them supporting the idea. So there do have many commonalities, but again, you might consider them not to be as equally important as all the other topics on, so you can pick and choose those areas that interest you most. What you probably have recognized and noticed, and I think that's very important, and I think it's much more than symbolism, that actually the coalition paper, which is a 170-page thick paper, starts with the European chapter. And this is very remarkable. That's the first time that actually the coalition paper as such starts with the EU chapter, but gives a very strong signal to inside Germany, but also to the European partners, that Germany considers, and this government with a CDU and an SPD sees basically the answers to the problems Germany is considering as problems, the answers with the European Union and with European integration. I think that's very important, and that's the clear message. Now, what you find in this European chapter, which is actually a very long chapter, and I strongly believe it's not just because Martin Schulz was negotiating on behalf of the Social Democrats. There is much more behind this. I think that's also important to be aware of. That if you look at the content of this introductory chapter on the European Union, you will see that there are also clear statements and commitments with regard, or which are important with regard to the ongoing or upcoming negotiations in Europe we will have about the MFF, the multi-financial financial framework. As you know, it's all about money in the European Union. It's about structural funds, it's about agriculture, and that costs money, specifically at times when we have a very strong member, a net payer into the EU budget, the United Kingdom leaving the European Union. So this is an ongoing discussion, where to find these 12 billion euros, who is going to pay for this, and what you will find in the coalition papers is a very strong commitment that Germany will be ready to pay for parts of it. So it clearly made a very strong statement in the coalition papers that it will be ready to pay more for the European integration process. It didn't specify how much more, okay? So that's, and I don't want to go into any details whether this is now sufficient or not sufficient, but it's a strong signal, very different from the other signals we are receiving inside the European Union now. And you probably followed last Friday the European Council, where you had the Austrian Prime Minister or the Dutch Prime Minister in front of the cameras clearly stating, no, we won't pay more, or at least if we have less money because the country is leaving, well, that basically means that we have to cut then the financial support on structural funds, on agriculture, and you all know in which direction that goes, right? Because we do have, with Hungary, with Poland, countries which are currently behaving, let's say, not always in line with the EU values, which we endorse in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union. And this is a way, very clearly in a diplomatic way, stating, well, guys, if you want to stay in the European Union and be respected as full members, you probably will have to reconsider some of your policies. And the only way a Mr. Rutte or a Mr. Kurz are considering how you could get Hungary and Poland around, let's say, a solution to the money question is to basically threaten them. And this is what Angela Merkel did as well, almost even for herself quite explicitly, threatening to freeze or to basically reduce the support for structural funds, or to basically link the money reserved for structural funds and agricultural policies, clearly to the performance with regard to the rule of law in our member states. So this is something we will have to see. I mean, it's obviously now power politics ongoing. It's basically positioning for the negotiations of the MFF. That's very clear. We know how that works. We know that we have a German commissioner. Yeah, by all means, we have a German commissioner, Mr. Oettinger, who is the commissioner responsible for basically coming up with the draft of the MFF for the multi-financial framework. So obviously you can see how that resonates in Polish press. Yeah, the Germans again. You know, there are many things ongoing. We have just a vice president of the European Parliament who was forced to resign, a Polish vice president, because of the announcements he made with regard to one of the Polish MEPs in the European Parliament, based on a TV investigatory story. I don't know whether you followed this here in Norway, but that was a very big issue, a very big thing, leading to the resignation of one of the vice presidents of the European Parliament. So it's everywhere, yeah, it's happening everywhere, and it is basically addressed everywhere. Now, coming back to now Germany and to what's currently going on inside of Germany. So what they basically agree in this coalition paper as well, it was not only about this first chapter being on about Europe and what it all included, amongst others, a stronger commitment to contribute financially also more to the EU budget. That it's obviously also about the ministries and the distribution of ministries. Because if we're interested in European Union politics, we all have to understand how actually European politics are orchestrated in Germany. And it's basically two actors. We have the chancellery on the one hand, and we knew that Angela Merkel would stay Bundeskanzler. That's basically one of the first things that was very clear from the very early beginning. But the other ministry, basically key in defining EU politics, is the Ministry of Finance. And that was in the past in the past, as you know, with Mr. Schäuble, a very strong minister, in the hands of the CDU as well. This was basically a go, no-go decision at the very end of the negotiations. From what we know from the very late hours negotiations is that Martin Schulz at the very end of the negotiations of the coalition program said, either we get the Ministry of Finance or we close the conversations here and we do not go into a government. It was apparently really black and white. So there was no choice actually. And there was a lot of silence apparently at that moment in time in the room. But in the end, as you know, we know now how the decision was taken. So the Social Democratic Party, in case we do have a next grand coalition, will have next to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also the Ministry of Finance, which is important specifically with regard to internal coordination and definition of EU politics inside of Germany. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is important too, to the extent, as you know, that the Ministers of Foreign Affairs are represented in the Foreign Affairs Council, chaired by Ms. Mogherini. But in Germany, it is normally also the Minister of Foreign Affairs or one of the state secretaries representing Germany in the General Affairs Council. And the General Affairs Council in the Council is important when it comes to also reforming EU issues, deciding the agenda, the European Council issues, etc. So you see, it is actually something to be aware of. And if the current Prime Minister of Hamburg will be the next Minister of Finance, you also will get an idea that he is more leading, let's say, to the, how should I say, to the right wing of the Social Democratic Party group. So it comes a little bit in favor of the CDU, and is clearly also a signal outside to the other EU partners. Now, so we have set the scene. That's the current situation in Germany. It's not only complicated, but I think you see that it is actually quite challenging, because a lot of things happened in Germany in the elections which are relatively new, and which we had to prepare for the very first time. Again, we have never seen so many different party groups in Bundestag. We have an opposition leader, which is the Alternative for Germany. We refer to a grand coalition which barely comes beyond 50% of support. Yeah, all of this, and two of them basically who lost in the elections 14% of the electoral vote. So this is something to be kept in mind. I think that's very important. Now, it has a very strong European profile, a very pro-European profile, a very federalist in some respect also profile. And then a lot of people now say, yes, that's the momentum, that's the time when, yes, the German Franco-German engine starts again and we will push for further European integration. Well, I don't know. To be very frank, well, we do have a French president who is very active and very prolific, is very outspoken, clarifies his ideas about European integration. To what extent they are really European, that's something we might want to discuss. He clearly represents the French interests in the European integration process, and that's probably also his job. We shouldn't blame him for this. But well, that's a question out there. I mean, he has ideas about European Defence Union, fine. And Germany actually, as a matter of fact, has also ideas about European Defence Union. But whether these interests are actually, if there are any commonalities, except for the label they feed into, I mean, this is something to be seen, because that's actually not that clear. They might ask for the same, but actually how to achieve it will look very differently. But at the same time, for those of you who have been following the European integration process for quite some time, you know that this is a constant, well, continuum, if you want, in European integration process. It's always about the two extreme poles, normally represented by the French position and the German position. And it's the moment when these two extreme positions come together and agree to move ahead that all the other member states can position themselves and rallying around the extreme poles, and basically can then support in the end more integration, whatever that means, than in the various policy areas. So yes, on the one hand, it is clearly reassuring that at least there is one prime minister, or in this case a president, of a country of 28 member states having a vision about European integration. So that's a good starting point, I would say, because we are lacking this from anywhere else. And if you look at what other possible candidates are, you will see immediately what the difficulties are currently we are having in the European Union. Because, well, in Germany, well, we are still figuring out what kind of government we will be having, and this for a remarkably long time. If we go further down to Italy, well, okay, we have elections there, and you know what's going on there for the time being. Also not reassuring in terms of really developing European ideas for European integration. Let's move further. Spain, well, they're pretty busy with the Catalonia question, or have been busy for quite some time, and Rajoy was happy to be back as a prime minister, but not much heard from Spain on the future of European integration either. Poland, well, make your own choice there, yeah. And if we continue, we do not have any of the big players, so to say, of the bigger member states currently in any position to clarify anything how they see European integration proceeding. So this is a big challenge, and so we do have his proposals, the proposals of President Macron, which are out there, and no one is basically picking up, or very few. It's more think tanks making a lot of the words and the presentations of the presidents rather than any other governments. Well, there is some movement in some areas. I will come back to this later on. Now, what you see here is, and I'm sorry, it is well, it is in German because it is a source. German source of the, as you see, our colleagues in Paris and in Berlin. What it basically says and does is it's comparing EU reform positions by different actors on EU-related issues. So, because what you have and what you probably are aware of, well, is the Macron speech, right? So that's very important. That's the GroKo, yeah, the big grand coalition coalition paper, and then you have activities and reports in the European Parliament, because the Parliament has been quite active with regard to thinking about how to reform the European Union as well. And we do have Juncker and Juncker's speech, with his speech to the Union. And then we have something that might have not attracted too much attention, but nevertheless it does exist. It is actually a paper, a statement by the Visegrad countries on the future of Europe, and that reads quite interestingly. Now, what you see here is, and we and the colleagues at the Delors Institute are helping you here by putting some colors, is that they're just picking up a couple of reform efforts, and frankly speaking, that might be not the most exciting ones, more for the Brussels bubble than really in the member states. I think in the member state what matters more is really policies. It's about whether or not we have a defense union, or whether or not there will be maybe an unemployment, a European unemployment, social benefits, and so on and so forth. You see, here currently, what we are in Brussels very much exposed to and very much interested are these institutional questions, and that's why I don't want to spend too much time here, but just to give you an idea about some of the ideas of transnationalists. You heard about the European elections. We are currently preparing the 2019 elections, so whether or not there should be transnationalists, whether or not we should continue having this top candidate process, the Spitzenkandidaten process, whether or not to actually merge the two jobs of the President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council, and whether or not we should have more consultations of the citizens at the citizen level. And you see, well, it's not remarkably green. There are a lot of yellow and red ones, and it's not only the Visegrad countries, right, which are now opposing. You see that the Grand Coalition has positions hardly on any one of those topics, yeah, at least not put in the coalition paper. So here you can say they're relatively flexible, and they see a little bit what will happen and then basically adapt their positions accordingly. But also between Macron and Juncker, or Macron and the European Parliament, you see there is not much they do share. I mean, this is something to be aware of. I mean, they do have very different positions. And this is something to be kept in mind. Now, talking about now the future of Germany in the European integration process is probably also being aware, basically embracing the idea that it's not only about Germany or about Germany and France. And I think it's probably a strong statement, me being a German and following the European integration process for maybe not so long. I'm only 40 years old, but what I strongly believe in and I'm strongly convinced about is it's simply not sufficient for the European integration process if Germany and France agree. I mean, we have 28 member states currently in the EU, and still, yes, we do have 28 member states and not 27. 28 member states, and I know from my teaching at the College of Europe or so that the Brits coming to these, they're already preparing coming back into the European Union. Yeah, so there is also a generation foreseeing maybe also, yeah, there are also eager people who already have started their campaign, their personal fights and campaigns to bring the UK in 20, 25, 30 years back in the European Union. Yeah, these people do exist, and this is something to be kept in mind. Now, that it's not only about Germany and France deciding, and as soon as they agree, hey, we move ahead with European integration. They're, of course, important. As we said, for European integration, the history has shown they are normally representing extreme positions which have been brought together. But around these extreme positions, there are other member states as well, with their histories and their cultures and their fears and maybe also geographical exposures and also experiences of good practices with challenges we have in cyber security or digital agenda, that we do have to have a very close look also at what's going on in all the other countries. And we do have in 2017, 2018 and 2019, until the EP elections, a number of elections taking place. I think this is something not to be forgotten about. It's Italy, it's Hungary, it's Slovenia, it's Latvia, and it's Sweden. We do have elections upcoming there, and they are quite important. So what I did for this very purpose, very quickly, I basically took the last polls from this weekend for so how it currently looks like with regard to the outcome of the national elections. As you know, 4th of March is this Sunday. So on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock, you will have the results of the German party members. Yeah, that's what I was just informed about. So that's what you can expect. And then in the late evening, as you know, in Italy, it takes always a bit longer. The polls, they all take a bit, they're longer open. They don't stop at 6 as in Germany, but here you can vote, I think, even until 10 o'clock in some regions. So it will take a little bit of time. But what you basically see is what I did here now is I gave you some indications about the current distribution, how it looks like. And I put and addressed the European party families here. Now, you might not be familiar with the two European party families, so that's why I basically put here also the Italian party group names. But I did put here the European party group families, just to give you an idea where they stand inside of the European Union and the European Parliament. And the Cinque Stelle, the five-star movement, is clearly one of the parties, as you know, which is leaning more to Eurosceptical, more to the right. And this is now in the lead with 27%. The Socialists, the Partito Democratico, currently with 23%, but as you know, we do need to think and reflect in Italy in terms of coalitions. So we do have Forza Italia, we have here the Lega Nord and others, so that's the current composition. Now we will see on the 4th of March what will be coming out of this, but you clearly see that this is a rather cooperative partner currently in the European Parliament. If you talked with MEPs in the European Parliament, they will say, yes, they're Eurosceptic, but at least they come and they work, they have positions and they are willing to work, because the Front National MEPs, they don't even show up in Brussels. Yeah, I mean, they're not even there to work. Yeah? I mean, and there you can really say, yes, I mean, you can really make it that black and white. It's really dramatic. But the Cinque Stelle has actually quite a good reputation in the European Parliament in terms of being willing to participate. Look at Slovenia. You might say, well, it's a small country. Yes, fine. But still, if we talk about Balkan strategy, the Western Balkans, enlargements, migration issues, there are border issues also inside the European Union with Croatia. So it is actually quite an important player in a number of issues. You will see here, it's the current, so the current one is actually the biggest party group which would currently lead the polls in Slovenia is not even part of a European party family. Yeah, so this would still need to be decided. Yeah, but just to give you an idea, yeah, what that also might imply for European politics as such. And here a lot of diversity, a lot of party groups, as you see as well. I think that's also one of the points I raised earlier with regard to the figures for Germany. You have Sweden here. The current composition, probably a partner you know very well, with the SD, the Swedish Democrats, performing also considerably well. We have Hungary. I mean, this might be, yeah. This is, I think, always a very gentle reminder to what we think, or some of you might think about Hungary and also Poland, and just facing the reality of politics in Poland. Because if I would show you the polls for Poland, you will see that the current Peace Party government has also support of 51%. It's not just because we might not like the party positions of these parties that they don't have any support back home, but they were actually super successful. And this is, I think, always also bringing to the attention also of the German public and also of others to be aware of this. And you see, I mean, Viktor Orban, he will be still there. And he's the second longest serving prime minister in the European Council, next to, most likely, Angela Merkel, who's there for almost ever. I only know Helmut Kohl, Gerhard Schröder and Angela Merkel. That's how I was, well, at the age of 40, that's what you get in Germany. So that's basically the current situation. In Latvia, you see here the current situation, so it's less diverse, it's less split up across party lines, but this is clearly something I think to be aware of. And this is another figure. just to also highlight the issue what I was referring to the Alternative for Germany and Eurosceptic or anti-European sentiments in our parties. These are the percentage share of right-wing Eurosceptic parties in national elections, current state of the art. And we just made the effort to look into various EU member states to just give you an idea where they are. And this is not the polls, but this is the electoral results, okay? So that's how they basically performed in their last national elections. And you see, in most of the countries, they are 2-digit strong. And now something to be aware of, because this will dominate also the EU agenda in the next couple of months, is this. Because we have European elections, and as you know, we have this phenomena in European elections, this second-order elections, yeah, as we call them, that in European elections it is specifically smaller parties performing much better. It is not government parties performing very well. They're normally weaker in European elections. It is smaller party groups that win much stronger support in European elections. The so-called second-order argument in the literature. And if you look at here, I mean, and just a gentle reminder, in the last 2014 elections, it was Marine Le Pen winning the elections. In the UK, because of the different political system or the voting rules for European elections in Britain, it was Nigel Farage with UKIP winning the European elections. I mean, we should not forget about the considerable, well, the importance of some of those in some of those countries. And if we have now 7% in Germany, so we did have for the first time parliamentarians from the Alternative for Germany elected during the European elections with 7.1. If we trust the polls now in Germany, we have reached now the level of 14 to 15%. Yeah, and if we then believe that in European elections they are normally performing even better, 20%, let's say 20% in European elections, that translates in Germany with 1%, normally 1 MEP. So basically meaning that we have 20 Alternative for German members in the future European Parliament. This is not a very unlikely scenario, ladies and gentlemen. 20. I mean, Slovenia, Luxembourg, they sent 6 MEPs to the Parliament. 20 is a big number with 751 MEPs. So this is something to be taken into consideration when talking about the current German situation and AfD being in the opposition leader in the Bundestag. Yeah. So this is something to be taken into consideration, but to also put it in a broader European context, because what is happening in Germany is not Germany specific. I think many similar trends are actually happening also in the other EU member states. As you can see here, yeah, you have differences between Eurosceptic parties. I mean, it's very different. You cannot really compare the Swedish Democrats probably with Jobbik or with the Vlaams Belang in Belgium. I take the point, but what we basically just show you here is where you have Eurosceptic parties in government and in opposition, and to what extent there are the big coalition partners or the opposition leaders, or small coalition partners and smaller opposition parties. And as I said, in case we will have on Sunday then the verdict for a grand coalition, I have to move this one up here to the AfD becoming the opposition leader in the German Bundestag. There is one other aspect I have prepared for you, but maybe I leave it here for the official talk, and I will come back maybe to these figures in case there is a question I can sabotage and basically use in order to make another argument, because that's probably also something to be kept in mind. This is a debate we have predominantly in Germany. This has not really spread over into other EU member states. But something to be kept in mind, yes, you know the results of the 2017 elections in Germany. This is the dark, bold, basically figures here you see. But if you basically put this in perspective with the total number of people actually who made use of their voting rights, these percentages actually become much smaller. and you will see, these are the percentages. And I know I'm dramatizing here a bit, but if you then put together the 25% of the CDU, so that's basically would be the support if everyone in Germany would have basically made use of their voting rights, right? Because then the non-voters would have been that strong. And so the future Grand Coalition would not only have been 53% of the vote support, but actually of the overall voters would only have a support of 25 plus 15 of 40%. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your attention and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Michael, for a very interesting talk. And also I think it is important that you shed light on the fact that everything will not be solved in Europe with, with an agreement on Sunday, and that it's this challenge with the rise of the Eurosceptic parties that is kind of the real challenge for Europe in the years to come. I will now open the floor for questions. So please, please sign up. I have one here. Yeah, you can start.
My name is Heislef, and I'm coming from outside as a private person here. Can we draw a conclusion that the most probable outfall of what is happening in Germany now, that is a minority government? Can we draw that conclusion already? Even if it's not the final conclusion, it opens up for a second question, and that question is how long time will it take to establish such a minority government? Because that would also take quite a lot of time, I think.
Thank you very much. Should I respond to these questions or should I collect?
You can
Okay.
start.
Okay. So basically, I strongly believe there is a much higher likelihood that we will have a grand coalition on Sunday than rather a minority government. I think from what I hear now from the different Länder in Germany and those actually rallying and debating and discussing with party members, there is a rational, I think there will be a rational, positive decision towards a grand coalition. Emotionally, there is clearly no support for a grand coalition. If you just ask them without any strategic considerations whether you wanted a grand coalition, the majority of SPD members would say no. But they also know that there are very few alternatives and that they have to move ahead, and there are rational considerations to be taken on board. And this will basically lead, I think, to a tight, but it will lead to a majority in favor of the Grand Coalition. If, however, because, well, I'm just an academic, right? If on Sunday there won't be a support, I'm not a party group member myself, I basically, in case we do have then a minority government, I think first of all it would be then relatively likely that we would consider a minority government, and that this would, however, take time to the extent, just imagine we have now end of February, we have the Easter break, and that it would probably lead, well, right before the summer in May, June, the minority government would be in place. But then we have the summer recess, there won't be much happening there, and then we are already entering the electoral campaign phase for the European elections, so there is not much there. And there is one other feature I haven't mentioned yet, but obviously also the European agenda, the leaders' agenda. For the first time we have the European Council with a concrete, Mr. Tusk, who outlined concrete tasks for the heads of state and government to be debated. And for the next March, April, May, they are very important issues on the agenda. And as long as we then do not have a German government, or not even a minority in place, there will be no further progress made on these agenda points, and that's probably the biggest challenge.
Question from Christian.
Hi, thank you for a very, very interesting talk. My name is Christian Haugevik. I'm a researcher here at NUPI. I have two questions, basically, and they concern bilateral relations. Because here in Norway, we often talk about, in terms of the Brexit negotiations, we talk about how the loss of the UK as a partner inside the EU will impact on sort of, you know, the promotion of Norwegian interests, so to speak, because Norwegian interests often coincide with the British one. And then increasingly also here in the debate about European affairs, Germany is highlighted as an important partner for Norway and also for the other Nordic countries, I think we could say. So this leads me to two questions. And the first is, what does the British departure from the EU sort of voting record imply for Germany? How does this sort of impact on the balance, so to speak? And then secondly, is there a similar or corresponding debate about the Nordic countries currently in German politics? Do you see any increased interest in our politics, so to speak? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I understand that this is a very important topic, and I do see the link between the Brexit and Euro interests and maybe losing a very important ally or not, question mark, whether to rallying around Germany or not, right? So that's basically the ongoing issue here, also inside of Norway. Well, let me make maybe 2 or 3 statements. First of all, I think it's very important to be aware of, if you look at voting behavior in the Council and in the European Parliament, that Germany and UK have taken very often very opposing positions. They have been relatively often, both of them, in minority positions. That's also quite striking. Normally, as a German, you would always expect our positions are the decisions to basically survive and are successful in EU negotiations, but that's actually not the case. If you look at VoteWatch data, for example, voting behavior in Council or the European Parliament, you will see that both Germany and the UK have very often been in the minority, and both of them, interestingly, have also taken very different positions. And that's what is quite interesting, linking to what you just said, that you would rather see a very natural ally with the UK, here in Norway. And also, on the other hand, you have very strong, good relationships, the relations between the two prime ministers of Norway and Germany, right? Very strong and very good ones. But interestingly, if you then it probably would depend then on the policy areas you're particularly interested in, and to have then and zoom into here, to what extent you are closer here or there. Because as a general rule of thumb, there is this paradox of really having, if you look at voting behavior, of both of the countries being relatively often in the minority position, and very often, interestingly, also having very opposing positions. So the whole debate we have had in the Brexit negotiations about Germany losing in a very important ally, well, is maybe correct in some few policy areas, like also reforming efficiency of the European administration, free trade supporters, yes, and also the transatlantic supporters in German politics, yes, that's for sure. But in a number of other issues, environment legislation, social affairs legislation, I mean, they could not be further away from each other than they currently are. Now, as regards the question of the German interest in Nordic countries, I think there is a lot of, maybe less so in the media, you would say, but I think between experts, yes, for sure. I mean, all the security issues, the relations with Russia, with China, I mean, the geographical relevance of this region here, the links with the seas. Obviously, these are all issues pretty much on the agenda of the policymakers, that's for sure. It's less so that my grandmother would become almost super excited and read. But there is not much to be read, let's say, about the future of the Nordic or the relevance of the Nordic countries for the European integration process. At the same time, I do see, and that's quite remarkable as well, I do see in German politics and also in media, much more attention to national politics. So we do have, when we had elections in France, when we did have elections in the Netherlands, but it will be also with elections in Sweden, we will have full evening coverage in the German news, we will have not only just a news of 15 minutes in the Tagesschau at 8 o'clock, but there will be a whole evening dedicated to the outcome of the Swedish elections. And this is a very new development we see since a couple of years now. But here I have to say I'm also very proud about the good quality of German press, because, well, luckily we have the money to have all the correspondence everywhere, because that's another challenge we have in Brussels. If you look around and walk around, I mean, Finland is not even represented anymore in Brussels. They basically, yeah, they tap on English journalists and basically translate this into Finnish, and that's what you can read about European politics then very often. That's a real disaster. And you see even, because of budget constraints of the media, of public channels, of newspapers, that you have less and less actually diversity in Brussels when it comes to this. It's not many who can afford this anymore. So this is something to be kept in mind. But here, luckily in Germany, there is still quite, I mean, we actually are increasing the numbers of journalists for the Süddeutsche, the FAZ, the ARD and ZDF. But this is a very exceptional trend, I would say. And that is threatening, and that's really a problem. When you have someone, a cabinet member from the Finnish commissioner, Mr. Katainen, telling me that basically what he reads in Finnish news is a copy and paste job, translation jobs from their colleagues from the Financial Times. I mean, that's, I think that's clearly a problem. Yeah.
Ulf also has a question.
Thank you so much, Michael. This was very interesting. I had two questions. The first is, what could you say a few things about why did the Germans vote for AfD? Obviously, the German economy is performing very well, very little unemployment, but perhaps there's a different dimension here. It's not a left-right dimension, but there's a new political dimension in European politics, yeah, related to identity affairs and migration, this Europe, yeah, local. So maybe you could say something about the kind of the cleavages in German politics and how they are evolving. So that's the first question. The second question relates to the GroKo and its view on security and defense. You made some remarks in your table on this, but two big issues. One is how and to what extent will GroKo kind of strengthen the investment in security and defense in Germany, and secondly would be the direction of that kind of investment. Will it be related to the NATO 2% target, and how would they see the relationship between the European security and defense initiatives around PESCO and other instruments, whether this is in harmony or in competition with the kind of NATO track? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, two very relevant points. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany. This is something that has obviously attracted a lot of attention over the last couple of months. And what you can clearly see is I mean, the AfD, first of all, got the support from basically all political directions. So it's not only a left-right issue, totally right, I fully agree. The AfD got a lot of support of former CDU voters, but also liberal voters, a lot of even Linke, extreme left voters. So actually, the Alternative for Germany is obtaining the support from former voters and also former non-voters, so they're actually also mobilizing a very critical, important number of previous non-voters to support them in the elections. So I think that's very important. First of all, to understand that they're basically recruiting support from across the political spectrum, from all parties, and there is not one outlying bias or anyone. And the other point is that they are managing to mobilize long-term non-voters to get back to participate and cast their vote. So these, I think, are two important features. Now, the other, in terms of cleavages, what you can see is that there is clearly a high degree, a high level of male unemployed from Eastern Germany. There is a very strong trend. You see that you have so the criteria applied for quite a long time. But then in 2017, when we had the elections, we all by a sudden also started realizing that it's not only about young male from East Germany, because here it would be the classical kind of cleavages of unemployment, education, etc. The losers, so to say, not the winners of globalization. But that you all by a sudden start in 2017 realizing, because the CSU, the sister party in Bavaria of the CDU, lost terribly the German elections at the cost of the Alternative for Germany. Actually, Alternative for Germany was performing in Bavaria, in Baden-Württemberg, also in the strong powerhouses of Germany, of German industry. Right, very strongly. And there you clearly see the cleavage which comes in is the migration issue, the issue of feeling safe at home. And it's more the feeling of being safe. We have currently a very topical issue, which is actually, I don't know how you translate this in German, but it's actually in the Ruhr region. It's in Essen. It's a city in the Ruhr region, so that's where ThyssenKrupp, yeah, so the heartland of ThyssenKrupp, that's Essen, and there we have the, so to say, Essenstafeln, yeah, so that's basically where you can go to when you don't have sufficient money to get food, and they're open to everybody. Now, the thing is that the Essenstafel in Essen just decided last week and announced that it would that it started earlier this year to stop accepting the applications for getting food there for non-Germans. And as you can imagine, that created an outcry all over Germany for all the, basically, how can you do this? I mean, you cannot be discriminatory against non-Germans, etc., etc. But basically, this underlines a problem. The problem is, and I think this is only what we start realizing very slowly and also start accepting, that basically their argument is that in the past, we had a lot of old people coming there, a lot of single mothers coming there, and because the lines were getting crowdier and crowdier, they started to abstain and not to come anymore, at the cost of migration, refugees who were basically queuing as well. And this is why actually they decided to stop accepting new applicants for the Essenstafel, not being German. And so basically it underlines the problem is, and that's probably the main cleavage, and also in the Ruhr region, I mean, where my university is, there is the strongest support now in former social democratic powerhouses for the Alternative for Germany. They're not anymore voting for the Social Democrats, but they're voting for the Alternative for Germany. And why is this? Because not of the economic component, but basically because of the fear against the unknown, the rise of the crime rates, which have been rising as well, which they do correlate, or which they connect one and the other, whether there is a causal link, that's a totally disinterest, but it's the emotional, it's the feeling of being not anymore safe at home, to basically take the tram in the Ruhr region or the train and not to hear German anymore, anywhere. Yeah, that's basically what this is all about. Now, and this is something the CDU and also the other parties have started to understand, and you will see in the new government we have now also prolific politicians such as Mr. Spahn, who is very young but a very outspoken critic of Angela Merkel's migration policy and refugee policy, and basically in line with the CSU rhetorics is basically pursuing this line of, well, having now a home ministry. Just, I mean, we don't call it anymore even the Ministry of the Interior, but we even call it Heimatministerium. Yeah. So you see, there is a lot of kind of changing also in rhetorics and in labels in order to make people feel home again. That's probably what the current discussion is aiming at. And with regard to, the security and the defense issues, maybe very short here. Clearly, I mean, the lucky position Germany is currently in is clearly that there are a lot of taxpayers' money. We had, I just was telling yesterday, 40 billion euros, which the current government now in the coalition could distribute for projects. Yeah, so that's a lot of money they had at their disposal. But this will not lead to an increase in defense budget reaching the 2%. That's probably a bit too much to be expected. But what probably is most likely is that Germany will basically increase its role as an infrastructure hub, so to say, in Europe for NATO operations, to basically facilitate quicker, rapid reactions, be able to transport via Germany the needed material to the borders in case there might be incidences with regard to third parties such as Russia. So that's probably most to be expected in this particular field.
I want to add a question myself, because you said that that Germans are no longer feeling safe at home, and I think that is not only in Germany, it's of course all over Europe, and it's as you say, the reason for the Euroscepticism. But in France, Macron has kind of, he knows of course that is a challenge and that this is a problem in France as well, and he has tried to develop an alternative European discourse focusing on security for the citizens, both security and welfare. And that must be the main kind of ambition, or the main vision for Europe, is to develop a European Union that protects. This has been his slogan.
Yeah.
And of course there has been, as you say, differences in many policy areas between Germany and France. But I wonder now, with a new coalition government or a minority government, how do you think that they will find together on this, in order for the EU to survive, you have to have an EU that is supported, of course, by the population, and you have to deliver on key concerns of the citizens.
Well, that's actually not that of an easy question to be answered, to be very frank, because there are many dimensions to it. First of all, I think, well, as you know, President Macron clearly stated, just when the Jamaica coalition started, if the Liberals are in the government, I'm dead. That's what everyone quoted, and apparently he really said that, or in that context, we don't know. But basically what it comes down to is that with the Liberals and, well, pro-Brexit, basically very strong on a number of issues where they would not agree upon, that this would have been basically the end to many proposals put forward by Macron. Now with the GroKo, with the big grand coalition, the next challenge is that first of all it looked, hey, the GroKo might be running, and that was probably what Macron was also hoping for, because in the end they need each other. The German and the French government, they need each other, because otherwise things do not go ahead, specifically with all the other partners in Europe currently being so weak, such as the Italian government, such as the Spanish government, such as the Polish government, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's something to be aware of. The problem now is for Macron is that Schulz is not there anymore. I mean, to be very frank, that's it for Schulz. I mean, there is no option for him getting back in the one or the other way. I mean, he lost everything he got and gained during a year during German elections. He lost the chairmanship of the Social Democratic group. He won't be a minister in any of the governments. He might be coming back at some point, but for the time being, he's really out of German politics. I mean, that's it. And that's obviously very disappointing for everyone strongly believing in a strong European Union, because, well, clearly he has a lot of federalist, a lot of pro-European features he proposed, and some of them pretty much in line also with Macron's ideas. So he lost, Macron, if you want, also lost a very important ally in the future government, because all the others have almost no exposure or experience with European Union politics, if you look at the names which are floating around, except for van der Leyen, but she will be dealing with defense issues. Okay, that will be an issue, and there will be the enhanced cooperation, there will be more progress clearly on the horizon. Okay, that's fine. But as for the rest, I mean, look at the SPD candidates, look at the CDU names. There is no one with particular EU experience, so except for Angela Merkel. Yeah, so you see, that's a little bit of a challenge now, and they will have to sort out, as of Sunday onwards, how to then basically pursue this strategy. But security for citizens, economically, but also from a protection point of view, social benefits, etc., is clearly something from a rhetoric point of view the German government can clearly embrace. I mean, that's Macron has put forward shells of ideas, but they're not yet filled with life, and that's the thing. And he cannot fill them by himself, so he has to wait now until Sunday, or maybe a couple of more weeks and months for a minority government before we can start actually put flesh to the bones. Because for all the others, for defense issues, there we go ahead. There we even have extraordinarily a Minister of Defense who is actually only acting Minister of Defense, committing Germany on a number of issues, yeah, which is in the security conference now in Munich. I mean, her speech was full with commitments, and the government is even not confirmed. She's just acting Minister of Defense. So you see there's a lot of going on, testing the boundaries, and because there is a need for moving ahead, but there are also limits to it, defined by the Constitution. You can't commit the future government, as a matter of fact.
We have two more questions over here.
My name is Kjell Stamnes. I'm here as a private citizen. We saw from your figures that the big coalition lost almost 14%.
Yeah.
There may be many reasons behind it, but it certainly is also a signal that the voters are not satisfied with the achievement. So a big coalition will now start from a weaker position than 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Can this develop into a situation where the political party structure the coming years will change dramatically in Germany? For example, the Socialist Party will more or less disappear. Could you reflect a little bit on that issue, the domestic issue, if we get a big coalition?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, first of all, this is something, again, we see in Germany, but also in other EU countries. I mean, the role of parties has become much more, let's say, flexible, much more. I mean, party groups as such are not anymore these powerhouses as we are used to know them. We have more and more new parties appearing in the political spectrums, also in Germany with the Alternative for Germany. And I think something that you also see in France with the En Marche, this is a totally new party group now in place, and we will have to see to what extent this will also have an impact on European Union politics, because we still do not know where Mr. Macron and his party group will be joining in, whether the European People's Party or the Socialists or the Liberals, or whether he might actually develop a whole new party, European party family himself. And I'm telling you all of this because on the one hand it will have a huge impact on European Union politics, because it could basically reduce the impact of the European liberals further, because it would mean splitting them up. It could basically clearly also lead to a total evaporation of European social democracy, because more and more members and supporters joining then maybe a new party group. Like you have also in Austria with a party group, or everything around one charismatic figure and leader. That's the current clearly trend. The old parties do this as well. Look at CDU and Angela Merkel. Now the thing is, however, this will obviously also have an impact on German politics, because if we will have, for example, a new European party group family, this could also lead to a new national party in German politics, Or if you have, because the liberals are pretty much split. It's not a homogeneous group. The Social Democrats in Germany are also relatively, currently not very much a homogeneous group. So there is a risk that you would potentially see a further splitting up. And from 6 party groups now, we come from 4 party groups in parliament. Now we have 6 party groups in parliament, that we might have in the next elections maybe an additional party group. Yes, There is clearly the risk or the potential, I mean, whatever how you see it, yeah, of more party groups appearing also more in Europe, in German politics, yes.
Thank you. My name is Odd Gunnar Skagestad. I am an old age pensioner and independent analyst. In your listing of the positions of various political parties or groups of parties and some of the key individuals, you had a number of issues or salient issues on where you put these into this table. Now, one of those parameters you listed was the so-called, what did you call it again? The Spitzenkandidaten. I know that that is a subject which is very hotly debated in Brussels, yeah. But it's a long way from Brussels to Oslo, yeah. And we are not all that familiar with the yeah. content of that discussion. So if you could not sure. elaborate on it, yeah. but give us a very simplified explanation of that issue, no I would appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
So the top candidate or the Spitzenkandidaten process is very simple. It basically means that for European elections, which take place every 5 years, that we would actually have all the campaigning European party families identifying a lead figure being the face of the European party group family for the European elections. So what we had in 2014, the European People's Party, the biggest party, had Mr. Juncker as their top candidate. The European Social Democrats had Mr. Schulz as their top candidate. And the point is the following. The deal is, according to the EU treaties, that the winner of the European elections, so the party group winning the European elections, in 2014 it was the European People's Party, this lead politician, the leader, the Spitzenkandidat then of this winning party group, would then, so the idea, automatically be appointed President of the European Commission. This is at least the interpretation of the European Parliament and how Juncker became President of the European Commission. To basically have a direct link with the electoral turnout and basically the Commission being taken accountable by the EU citizens. Okay? So the idea. Now, as you can imagine, this is something EU citizens might like, but to be very frank, you can be a bit critical about this as well, because figures and research has shown that this has not really dramatically increased the participation in the European elections. There was something we called a Schulz effect in Germany, a Juncker effect in Luxembourg, yeah, and we had the Guy Verhofstadt effect in Flanders, yeah, so in the northern part of Belgium. But that was basically it. It was not really, I mean, we only stabilized the list of the participation. So there are a lot of people saying, well, and that's why it is now so hotly debated, whether we should do it again in 2019. And to make a long story short, there will be top candidates. So there will be top candidates again. That's very 99% sure that we will have them. Whether, however, then the winner of the European elections, the party group, the top candidate will become the next president of the European Commission, is again something to be seen. Last time the Parliament succeeded with Juncker. This time we will have to see who will be the candidates. As you know, for Macron, it's very important that the next president of the European Commission will be French. Which is fine. It has been a long time that we didn't have a French Commission president. But the problem then is, how do you, if you believe in the top candidate Spitzenkandidaten process, how do you get then a Frenchman through? If you know that the EPP might be winning again, being the biggest party group. So Mr. Macron has now to really think strategically whether or not to create this European En Marche party group at the European Union level. He can do this, but at the same time automatically pressure and push for a Frenchman leading the EPP, which is very likely to be Monsieur Barnier, because Monsieur Barnier, we all know, him negotiating perfectly the Brexit currently with the UK. He's a Frenchman. He's very well known in national politics, but also in European politics, because he's doing such an excellent job with regard to the Brexit right now. So that might be a way out for Macron, but this is basically what this is all about as well. It's about power politics and making sure that you basically get your friends in these various positions. Because as you know, it's also a lot of talk these days about Germany and Germany's influence. You have just heard that the Secretary General of the European Commission was appointed, or that he, was appointed, Mr. Selmayr, and he's German. And obviously these are very powerful positions inside the institutions, and they obviously do have an impact also on the day-to-day decision making.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I think we end. One more here.
Thank you. I'm Sven Scholz. I'm a German lawyer. I'm interested in your opinion about the voting of the SPD on Sunday. Isn't it somewhat undemocratic to give a vote of a SPD member such a big influence on building the government compared to regular votes? And my second question is, in case there will be a minority government, would the cabinet of ministers look differently to a great coalition? Thank you.
Okay, so that's an ongoing discussion we have in Germany to the extent whether or not this is actually fair or unfair to have now 476 members of the Social Democratic Party deciding on the future of the German government. Well, my standpoint here is, as probably also the majority nowadays, on this matter, that this is not unfair. It might feel unfair, but in the end, this is a very basic democratic, if you want, core democratic, very down-to-earth democratic principle that you might want to ask your partner, your members of the party group, whether or not to join a coalition or not. I mean, this is the Social Democrats which have established this in their statutes. So they are ruling according to what they put in their statutes. The CDU would never do this. For them it was sufficient to have a special party congress, but also here 1,000 were allowed to vote. So it was also here 1,000 but delegates with positions, obviously, with party being asked. But this is maybe nowadays the majority opinion, but you're totally right in pointing out that there are actually a lot of specifically lawyers pushing these discussions to the extent that it might be very much undemocratic. We have in the FAZ, in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, very important lead articles making this claim. But me personally, I think it is basically what we have, or what the party groups, according to the laws we have in Germany, have decided. The internal proceedings are accordingly, so I do not really see a problem there. We knew that from the very early beginning that we would have party members being asked on these very matters, at least potentially. So, and as you know, there are also thresholds to it. This is only binding the moment we have at least a quarter of members actually participating. I mean, we reached this quota 3 days after the opening of the, so there is a lot of interest. So, yeah, I guess it's, if you strongly believe in the basic democratic elements of decision making, that's probably what you would hope for, maybe happening in other parties as well. You could also split it that way. Now, with regard to the government, well, clearly it will be a possibility for those who didn't get a ministry now to come back, and for those for whom it was very difficult to now not be in the new set of ministry posts as presented on Monday, such as de Maizière. He will definitely be then back in German politics. Yeah, he got so long standing ovations in the special party congress on Monday that everyone feels very and very sorry for him not being part. but it's now the Bavarian Prime Minister, or now Mr. Seehofer, who will basically do this. So there will be a number of those candidates, I guess, coming back, but there won't be many new figures, I think. So those being appointed already, I think they will clearly stay, because this has been done for strategic reasons also. And I think the support and the standing ovations of more than 5 minutes, yeah, you know, the journalists are counting every second in these kind of events. So Angela Merkel got at the end more than 5 minutes of standing ovations with the new Secretary General, as you know, Kramp-Karrenbauer. All these choices were considered to be, and I think everyone would agree right now, a big success for appeasing the party, the CDU, for the time being. And I don't think that she has any interest in a minority government to break this up. To the contrary. She has more minister posts to be filled.
Thank you so much, Michael. This was very, very insightful, both the presentation and for answering also all the questions. So thank you all for coming. Yeah, you just follow. We don't have any planned next seminar, I think, on European issues, as far as I know. But just look at our webpage, and it will soon be the next seminar. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.